Imagine holding in your hands absolute power over life and death, deciding the fate of millions, and in a single judgment, signing a sentence that would make your name remembered forever, not as a hero, but as a coward. You wash your hands before the crowd, water trickling over fingers laden with gold rings, thinking you are free from that colossal decision. Pontius Pilate, the governor of Judea, believed that the death of a Galilean carpenter would be nothing more than a forgotten footnote in the vast annals of the Roman Empire. He could not have been more wrong. History often freezes Pilate in that exact moment, in the courtyard of the Praetorium, delivering Jesus to death and later granting the priests a guard of Roman soldiers to seal the tomb. But the book of his life did not end on that bloody Friday. What accounts usually omit is the terrifying and brutal decline of the man who tried to bargain for Rome's peace, only to be swallowed by the very imperial machine he served so faithfully. Pilate was not a high-born aristocrat. He was a knight of the equestrian order, a man who rose to power through force, unbridled ambition, and a methodical brutality that impressed his superiors. Feel the weight of the tense air in Caesarea Maritima, the Roman military capital of Judea. The unbearable 40-degree heat mixes with the salty breeze of the Mediterranean and the cold, metallic smell of sweaty legionary armor. Pilate ruled with a heavy iron fist. He did not understand local customs and had no desire to. His actions were marked by continuous provocations, and he believed that fear was the only true universal language. But fear is a volatile currency, and Pilate was about to discover that when you build your empire on the innocent blood of others, your own blood will eventually be collected without mercy. Rome did not forgive failure, and the prefect's hourglass had finally turned. Have you ever felt the cold grip of a mistake you cannot undo, a decision that haunts the periphery of your vision like a shadow? For Pontius Pilate, the aftermath of the trial in Jerusalem was not a moment of relief, but the beginning of a slow, agonizing psychological erosion. Imagine the governor in his private quarters in Caesarea, the flickering oil lamps casting long, distorted shadows on the cold marble walls. He had tried to play a dangerous political game, balancing the demands of the volatile Judean elite against the uncompromising expectations of Rome. He thought he had won by washing his hands, but the silence that followed was louder than the screams of the mob. The historical conflict that would eventually dismantle him began not with a religious dispute, but with a massacre. In the year 36 AD, a self-proclaimed Samaritan prophet promised to reveal sacred vessels hidden by Moses on Mount Gerizim. Thousands of desperate, hopeful Samaritans gathered, some carrying weapons, most carrying only their faith. Pilate, ever the pragmatist and ever the brutalist, saw not a religious gathering, but a rebellion in its infancy. He didn't hesitate. He sent the heavy infantry and the cavalry. The air on the slopes of Gerizim soon smelled of iron and dust as Roman gladii cut through the crowd without distinction between the guilty and the innocent. This was the breaking point. The Samaritan council complained to Lucius Vitellius, the legate of Syria and Pilate's superior. Vitellius, weary of Pilate's constant provocations and the unnecessary bloodbaths that threatened the fragile Pax Romana, finally acted. He ordered Pilate to return to Rome to stand trial before the Emperor Tiberius. Can you feel the sudden chill in Pilate's veins? To be summoned to Rome was often a death sentence disguised as an invitation. He was no longer the hunter. He was the prey as his ship pulled away from the Judean coast, leaving behind the province he had ruled with such arrogance for 10 years. Pilate looked back at the receding shoreline, perhaps wondering if the ghost of the Galilean was finally catching up to him in the form of Roman justice. Imagine the long and agonizing ship journey across the Mediterranean. Weeks at sea, where every wave hitting the wooden hull was a reminder of the relentless fate that awaited him. When Pontius Pilate finally landed on the Italian peninsula in the spring of 37 AD, the empire he believed he knew had changed drastically and terrifyingly. Emperor Tiberius, the man who had appointed him and whom Pilate had tried to appease during a decade of cruel mandates, was dead. In his place, the throne of the Roman world now belonged to Caligula, a young emperor whose mental instability and insatiable cruelty would make Pilate's brutal tactics in Judea seem like child's play. Pilate found no rational court waiting for him. He found absolute chaos. Behind the scenes of ancient history, it is revealed that Pilate was summarily stripped of all his functions, despoiled of his title as prefect, his honor, and his dignity before a demanding Roman society. There were no glorious debates in the Senate, nor grand defenses like those we imagine in cinematic epics. There was only the cold, bureaucratic contempt of Rome. Historians like Eusebius of Caesarea document his dark and humiliating end. He was not executed in a public arena, which, for a Roman military man, would have been an almost understandable end. Instead, he was exiled, relegated to the dark and icy fringes of the empire in Gaul near the present-day city of Vienne, France. Feel the brutal contrast. From the warm, sunny balconies of the palace in Jerusalem, where he decided the fate of priests and prophets, to the freezing mists of a lonely and nefarious exile, the scent was no longer that of Eastern spices, but of mud and the biting European cold. Ancient legends echo this psychological torture, suggesting he spent hours by icy rivers, rubbing his hands in the water in an obsessive repetition, trying to clean invisible bloodstains. The man who tried to wash his hands before the crowd to rid himself of guilt was now condemned to wash them forever, devoured by the empire he once idolized. Imagine the crushing weight of being remembered forever, not for your military victories or your political cunning, but for your greatest and most cowardly mistake. In exile in the province of Gaul, surrounded by dense forests and the constant, melancholy sound of the Rhone River, Pontius Pilate had endless years to reflect. The purple of his tunic slowly faded under Central Europe's merciless climate, and the deep wrinkles on his aging face told the story of a man who lost everything. He no longer had legions to command, nor angry crowds to silence with threats. The icy silence was now his only companion, and within that silence echoed a theological and historical irony of unimaginable proportions. The great revelation regarding the end of Pontius Pilate is not just the silent brutality of his physical exile, but his perpetual exile in human memory. He surrendered his soul and served an empire he believed to be indestructible and eternal. Rome, with its perfect roads and unbeatable armies, seemed the absolute pinnacle of civilization. Pilate sacrificed his own moral compass and condemned a man he knew to be innocent just to maintain the artificial and cruel peace of that empire. However, the powerful Roman Empire eventually crumbled. The emperors he so feared and desperately tried to please, Tiberius and the insane Caligula, became mere dust and ash under the ruins of time. But the name of Pontius Pilate survived them all. Sinta o impacto profundo desta verdade cortante. Pilate's name has been recited every Sunday for more than 2 millennia by billions of voices worldwide. Not in a triumphal arch, but in a universal confession of faith, the Apostles' Creed, suffered under Pontius Pilate, the ruler who desperately tried to wash his hands to exempt himself from responsibility ended up having his name eternally carved into history for that terrible omission. His attempt at political neutrality was his absolute ruin. In his final days, isolated in the biting cold of Gaul, so far from the scorching heat of Jerusalem, Pilate perhaps realized the futility of his ambition. That Nazarene carpenter was never truly judged by Rome. It was Rome and Pontius Pilate himself who were judged by eternity through that singular moment. Legend has it that the icy waters of the Gallic rivers were never enough to cleanse the conscience of the former governor. Eusebius and other ancient historians relate that, crushed by the weight of exile, the contempt of the empire, and his own fragmented mind, Pontius Pilate eventually took his own life. The man who had the Son of God before his eyes and asked, with cynical and hollow irony, "What is truth?" died without ever understanding the answer that was breathing right in front of him. He did not fall on a battlefield bathed in glory, nor was he buried with the honors of a Roman hero. He simply disappeared into the shadows of the ancient world, a tragic and obscure note that the universe, ironically, refused to forget. But what does Pilate's tragic end truly teach us today? His fall was not just the result of bad political management or the relentless fury of Emperor Caligula. It was the inevitable result of a man who chose immediate comfort over moral courage. Pilate teaches us, in a brutally dark way, that there is no true neutrality in the face of injustice. When you wash your hands in the face of a difficult decision just to protect your position, your status, or your false sense of peace, you have already taken the side of the oppressor. Silence and omission have a terrible cost, and life collects that price. He wanted to save his position, and in doing so, he lost everything. True power does not reside in avoiding conflict, but in standing on the side of truth. Now, I want to hear from you. What lesson do you take from this dark and lonely end of Pontius Pilate? Do you have any questions about this period of Roman history or the background of other biblical characters? Leave your questions and comments below. I want to read your perspective. And if this deep narrative impacted you, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so we can continue to unravel the great mysteries and backstories of history together.